When I lost my daughter, I believed grief was the heaviest burden a mother could bear, until her husband turned my mourning into exile. In the silence after the funeral, he told me I no longer belonged in the home I once helped nurture, and he tossed me out like discarded furniture. I survived on couches and sympathy, convinced the worst had already happened. But cruelty has a way of revealing itself when people believe no consequences remain. At the will reading, he smirked, ready to celebrate my ruin. He didn't expect that my daughter had left one last message, one that changed everything. My name is Evelyn Hargrave, I'm 71, and I never believed I would bury my daughter before myself. The grief swallowed my days and numbed my nights, leaving me drifting through a world that no longer felt familiar. The home where we once shared meals and laughter became a mausoleum of memories, her favorite chair untouched, her perfume lingering faintly in the hallway. In the weeks after her passing, I clung to the comfort of her husband's promise to take care of everything, believing he truly meant family. But mourning revealed people's true hearts, and mine was about to break all over again. The silence after the funeral was suffocating. Friends who once crowded the house with condolences slowly vanished, leaving only echoes of sympathy that faded quickly. She tried to keep routine, watering plants, ironing clothing, tidying up, but everything reminded her of absence. The kitchen table felt emptier, the bedroom colder, and even sunlight through the windows seemed harsher without the warmth of shared conversation. Bills continued to arrive, meals felt forced, and nights were long stretches of reliving final moments. Grief wasn't loud anymore, it was quiet, relentless, and isolating. She assumed her son-in-law struggled too, believing shared loss could create unity. She didn't realize it would instead expose cruelty. Subtle shifts came first. He avoided eye contact, answered questions curtly, and spent long hours away. The once shared breakfasts became solitary meals. Sympathy turned into impatience. He complained about expenses, hinted at burden, and spoke as though she were a guest instead of family. She tried attributing this change to grief, to stress, to anything but intentional callousness. But his tone sharpened each day, comments about space, privacy, and moving on began to surface. His mask slipped not in anger, but in indifference. She felt the warmth drain from the household, replaced by tension and unspoken accusations. The home that once sheltered her now felt foreign. She walked through the hallways and saw her daughter everywhere, her laughter in the kitchen, her voice echoing from the staircase, her knitting basket near the sofa. Photos lined the walls, reminders of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days now made extraordinary by loss. But every cherished memory clashed with the present reality. She could feel the distance growing with each passing day, as if the house was splitting in two, one half filled with love, the other filling with resentment. She tried dusting picture frames and tidying rooms as if maintaining order could mend fractures. But the home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like borrowed space, subject to eviction not just of body, but of memory. The confrontation was swift and cruel. He stood at the doorway with packed boxes and a rehearsed speech about moving forward. He told her the house was legally his now, and that she needed to find somewhere else immediately. Shock drowned out reason. She had helped pay this home's bills, tended its garden, and raised grandchildren within its walls, yet now she was treated as an intruder. The boxes contained only the bare essentials, handed over without ceremony or compassion. When the door closed behind her, it wasn't just wood meeting wood. It was the sound of displacement, of betrayal, of a mother cast aside. She found herself relying on distant relatives, people she hadn't stayed with in decades. Guest rooms were cramped, conversations awkward, and sympathy fleeting. She tried not to overstay, offering to cook or help with chores, but she felt the tension of being an obligation. Nights were restless and filled with questioning how life had unraveled so quickly. She wasn't looking for luxury, only stability. But staying with others felt like living in limbo, suspended between grief and humiliation. The loss of her home was more than physical, it was the loss of identity. Dependence, once temporary, began to feel like captivity. Despite exhaustion, she pinned her hopes on the upcoming reading. Her daughter had been thoughtful and fair in life. Surely her final wishes would reflect that. She imagined closure, perhaps justice. She rehearsed calm responses, not wanting to appear desperate or entitled. She prepared documents and memories, believing the law would protect what love once built. But anxiety gnawed at her. She had seen the son-in-law's newfound confidence, the smug glances, the whispered conversations. Something was amiss. The will reading wasn't just paperwork. It was the moment that would define her future, whether she would stand on her own feet or remain displaced. He didn't wait for privacy to flaunt his cruelty. At the will reading venue, surrounded by distant relatives and legal associates, he loudly announced that she shouldn't get her hopes up. He wore arrogance like cologne, smirking as he recounted how he handled everything after the funeral, implying she was incapable and irrelevant. When a neighbor expressed sympathy, he cut in, claiming she never contributed and therefore didn't deserve anything. His voice carried across the room, feeding off attention. She sat quietly, hands folded, letting the whispers sting. Grief had made her fragile, but humiliation made her tremble. It wasn't just rejection, it was public degradation. He strutted around with an air of untouchable entitlement, assured that the will would reward him exclusively. He boasted about renovations he planned, vacations he would fund, investments he would make, all with assets he assumed were his. He referred to the house, cars, and savings as if ownership had already been transferred. His certainty emboldened relatives, who nodded along and chuckled at his jokes. She watched quietly, realizing he wasn't just confident, he was careless. He believed he had already won and couldn't see beyond his greed. His arrogance grew with every passing minute, blind to the truth waiting inside that sealed envelope. Family members she once shared holidays with now drifted toward him, unwilling to risk association with someone they assumed would walk away empty-handed. Whispers filled the room, criticizing her age, her finances, and questioning her right to inheritance. Some claimed her daughter had always favored him. Others hinted she was a burden. The shift in loyalty was palpable. Invitations once extended warmly were now withdrawn. She felt like an outsider at her own daughter's memorial aftermath, surrounded by people who valued wealth over blood. Their alliance wasn't built on affection, it was built on expectation. And expectations, she sensed, were about to shatter. The lawyer, an older man with observant eyes, noticed the simmering hostility. He watched the son-in-law's smug behavior, the relatives' shifting alliances, and her silent composure. He cleared his throat more than once, as though warning the room that arrogance had no place in legal proceedings. He shuffled the documents deliberately, as if timing mattered. His glances toward her were subtle but steady, acknowledging her presence, her dignity, her grief. He seemed to carry knowledge others lacked, and behind his measured tone was the anticipation of something significant. He understood what the crowd didn't. Confidence built on ignorance collapsed quickly. The reading started predictably. The lawyer outlined simple bequests, sentimental heirlooms, small monetary gifts, charitable donations. The son-in-law leaned back, bored, waiting for the real portion. The room treated the early passages as mere formality. She listened quietly, hearing echoes of her daughter's voice in each thoughtful detail. It was bittersweet, reflecting a woman who valued fairness, compassion, and legacy. Yet beneath the routine language, subtle emphasis suggested something more was coming. The final page remained untouched, sealed separately. The son-in-law failed to notice the shift in tone, the deliberate pacing. He thought he knew everything. He didn't. As the reading progressed, murmurs intensified. Some guests exchanged knowing glances, convinced the bulk of assets would go to the son-in-law. Their eyes drifted toward her, not with pity but with satisfaction, ready to witness her downfall. They expected tears, begging, or defeat. It was a morbid anticipation, fueled by arrogance and gossip. She sat motionless, spine straight, refusing to grant them the spectacle they wanted. Her composure unnerved some, but most saw it as resignation. They didn't know her strength came not from hope, but acceptance. She had already lost everything she loved, or so they believed. Then the lawyer paused. His hand rested on the sealed final page, a portion separate from the primary will. The room quieted. Even the son-in-law leaned forward, curiosity overtaking arrogance for a moment. The lawyer mentioned a supplementary clause written shortly before her daughter's passing, one that superseded prior instructions. Gasps rippled. He explained that this final section could alter distribution significantly. The son-in-law's smirk twitched, faltered. Relatives exchanged uneasy looks. And she felt a flicker, small but undeniable, of possibility. Not revenge, not triumph, just the potential for truth. The lawyer carefully slid open the sealed envelope, his movements slow and deliberate, commanding silence. Papers rustled, and the room leaned in, not out of respect, but hunger for outcome. The son-in-law's confident posture stiffened as the lawyer explained that this addendum was handwritten and dated just 2 weeks before her daughter died. It wasn't routine, it was intentional. The lawyer's tone shifted, carrying weight. This was not a mere clarification, it was a reallocation. The crowd sensed it. The arrogant began to sweat. And she sat still, breath held, realizing her daughter had spoken from beyond the grave, not with sentiment, but with protection. The lawyer pressed play on a small voice recorder, and her daughter's voice filled the room, soft, weak, yet steady. She explained her illness, her fears, and her concerns about how she might be treated after she was gone. She mentioned specific behaviors from her husband, the dismissiveness, the financial secrecy, the coldness toward her mother. She apologized for not acting sooner. The room shifted from confidence to discomfort. Her voice wasn't angry, it was resolute. She stated that her mother should never be left without security and that her husband's entitlement should not be rewarded. Every word stripped away the son-in-law's narrative. The lawyer went on to reveal what her daughter never disclosed publicly: hidden investments she had maintained in her own name, stocks purchased quietly, savings accumulated discreetly, a business partnership registered confidentially. She had planned for emergencies, mindful of protecting her mother if needed. The son-in-law's face paled as numbers were read, accounts he didn't know existed. The realization dawned: the woman he undervalued had been far more capable and independent than he believed. She had protected her mother financially, even while battling illness. The assets weren't minor, they were substantial, enough to change a life, enough to correct an injustice. The lawyer then read a portion where the daughter described mistreatment during her final months: emotional neglect, manipulation, and disregard from the man who vowed devotion. Gasps echoed. Those who once sided with him shifted uncomfortably. His facade cracked as accusations turned specific: dates, incidents, witnesses. The daughter's account wasn't vague. It was documented. She knew she couldn't fight forever, so she laid groundwork for consequences. And in that moment, the crowd saw the truth. The mother wasn't being dramatic. She had endured cruelty. The ones who shunned her had judged the wrong person. Sympathy turned, loyalty wavered. Silence grew dense. The addendum detailed how he had lied about shared accounts, medical decisions, and household contributions. He exaggerated his role and minimized hers, painting himself as selfless. But receipts contradicted his claims. Hospital staff statements, emails, witness accounts all revealed manipulation. His narrative collapsed. He wasn't the grieving husband, he was an opportunist. The room watched as arrogance transformed into panic. He tried objecting, but the lawyer shut him down, patiently, legally, and decisively. His confidence had been built on deception, and each revelation dismantled it. Pride, once his armor, now felt like a costume being stripped in front of an audience. The lawyer read the pivotal clause: every asset, stocks, savings, property, life insurance payouts, was bequeathed solely to the mother. The son-in-law received nothing, not a percentage, not a conditional gift, nothing. The sealed addendum nullified all prior assumptions. The crowd froze. The man who expected to walk away wealthy now stood empty-handed. She wasn't elevated by greed, she was restored by justice. The daughter's last wish was not to punish, but to protect. The inheritance wasn't revenge. It was a correction. It gave the mother what she had been denied: security, dignity, and independence. And it took from him only what he never deserved. The lawyer concluded by announcing the total value, publicly and clearly. Gasps filled the room as the figure echoed. It wasn't modest, it was transformative, enough to change the mother's future forever. The son-in-law swayed, face drained, and collapsed, not from grief but from shock. Relatives who once avoided her now looked at her differently, not with pity but with respect and discomfort for their previous judgment. She did not smirk, she did not gloat. She merely breathed, allowing the weight of her daughter's love to settle. This wasn't a triumph, it was vindication. And everything was about to change. The courtroom felt frozen as the final amount echoed through the air. His expression shifted from smug certainty to hollow disbelief. Eyes widened, jaw slack, breath shallow. For a moment he tried to speak, raising a trembling finger as if to challenge the legality, but words failed him. His face drained of color and his knees buckled. Chairs scraped as he stumbled, collapsing before anyone reached him. It wasn't grief that struck him, it was the brutal realization that his imagined victory evaporated. The wealth he planned to enjoy, the life he envisioned, all vanished in seconds. And as he lay on the floor, gasping in humiliation rather than pain, she simply watched, steady and silent. The crowd's silence didn't last. Relatives who had abandoned her earlier now scrambled to correct their positions. They rushed to her side, offering condolences, claiming misunderstanding, pretending obliviousness to his cruelty. Their smiles, once smug and superior, became sickly and desperate. Compliments flowed, false apologies, exaggerated praise for her strength, and sudden admiration for her daughter's thoughtfulness. Their loyalty shifted with the wind, driven not by morality but by opportunity. She saw through it. These weren't allies, they were opportunists. The same people who watched her humiliation with satisfaction were now begging for forgiveness. She responded with grace, but her silence reminded them: loyalty tested by greed is not loyalty at all. When he finally regained composure, he attempted to challenge the will, stammering about fairness and intent, but the lawyer was unmoved. His tone remained calm yet firm as he explained the legality: every clause validated, every signature authenticated, every witness accounted for. The addendum was clear, deliberate, and irreversible. No loopholes, no ambiguity, no rescue. The man's desperation grew, insisting it was a mistake, that she manipulated the situation. Yet the law stood steadfast. The lawyer emphasized judicial precedents, witness statements, and notarization. The will wasn't a suggestion, it was binding. And the man realized in front of everyone that his reign of entitlement was over. He learned that not only was he denied inheritance, but assets he believed were jointly his were dissolving. Property titles shifted. Access to accounts was revoked. Business ventures tied to his late wife's contributions no longer belonged to him. The home he claimed ownership of now legally belonged to her mother. The man who once expelled her from its walls now faced eviction himself. It wasn't revenge, it was correction. The law stripped away everything he leveraged for power. Rights he took for granted vanished. The house that symbolized dominance became his reminder of powerlessness. He stood stunned, realizing entitlement affords no legal claim. News traveled quickly through family, community, and professional circles. Picture of a devoted husband crumbled when people learned of his public mockery and cruelty. Sympathy evaporated. Business associates withdrew. Prospective clients reconsidered. His carefully curated image shattered under factual exposure. He tried to defend himself, but recordings, testimonies, and the will reading itself left no room for manipulation. The charm he once relied on was now interpreted as deception. His downfall wasn't theatrical, it was methodical. Status dissolved. Admiration reversed, respect evaporated. And in the end, he wasn't seen as a grieving husband, but a greedy opportunist who was finally unmasked. Without inheritance, he couldn't maintain the financial commitments he had confidently expanded: mortgages, investments, loans used for lifestyle rather than necessity. Creditors demanded payment. Banks denied extensions. Legal notices arrived with increasing frequency. He had planned for wealth, not responsibility. And now, debt exposed his recklessness. The luxury car became an asset to liquidate. The expensive watch disappeared. Business ventures crumbled without financial backing. Every bill became a reminder that arrogance cannot substitute for planning. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was cornered. Debt, not dignity, dictated his next steps that led downward instead of forward. Eventually, the fallout reached beyond finances and family. His behavior became a cautionary tale, discussed in social circles, criticized online, whispered about at gatherings. He could no longer attend community events without facing stares or hushed conversations. His children's school events became uncomfortable. Invitations dwindled. Sympathy was non-existent. His downfall wasn't hidden behind courtroom walls, it unfolded in daily life. People no longer saw him as successful or respectable. They saw him as the man who mocked a grieving mother, only to collapse when justice arrived. Humiliation wasn't the objective, but it was the result of his own actions, and it was inescapable. Because what happened next wasn't mercy, it was poetic justice. Like I'm asking you to subscribe, you can feel the final twist building. With the inheritance formally transferred, she didn't rush to confront or celebrate. Instead, she scheduled meetings with real estate attorneys and probate officials. Quietly, methodically, she secured full ownership of the home she was forced out of. She didn't demand entry or make a spectacle. She simply served notice that the property was legally hers now, backed by documents instead of emotion. Standing outside the door she once left with boxes in hand, she felt a mix of sorrow and empowerment. She wasn't reclaiming bricks and wood. She was reclaiming dignity. The home represented security, history, and closure. And she took it back with grace, not rage. The legal timeframe passed, and he no longer had grounds to remain. Papers arrived informing him he must vacate within 30 days. He tried negotiating, bargaining, pleading, but the law was clear. Without inheritance and with mounting debts, he had no cushion. Possessions he once flaunted became items listed for sale. Furniture, electronics, even decorative pieces were auctioned to cover overdue payments. His life shrank from luxury to necessity. Leaving the home wasn't just physical displacement, it was symbolic. The roof he used to weaponize against her now slipped from his grasp. Consequences weren't delivered in anger. They arrived through due process. Instead of spending her newfound wealth on indulgence, she honored her daughter's memory. She established scholarships for young women pursuing careers her daughter once dreamed of: medicine, social work, and community service. Each award carried her daughter's name, turning loss into legacy. The initiative didn't just help students financially, it inspired compassion. Families wrote letters expressing gratitude, and former teachers attended ceremonies. Through these efforts, she ensured her daughter's values lived on. Her wealth wasn't a trophy, it was a tool. A way to transform pain into purpose, grief into generosity, and injustice into empowerment. She found healing not in punishment, but in contribution. As financial investigators reviewed estate records, discrepancies surfaced. The son-in-law's past dealings, once hidden beneath charm, revealed forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, and misuse of joint accounts. Former business partners, previously silenced or ignored, now saw opportunity for justice. Lawsuits were filed, hearings scheduled. He wasn't punished for losing inheritance. He was held accountable for actions predating it. The world didn't turn against him because he was unlucky, it turned because he was dishonest. Each legal notice stripped away his confidence, replacing arrogance with fear. His downfall wasn't orchestrated, it was earned. As his reputation collapsed, hers blossomed. Organizations invited her to speak about resilience and advocacy for widows and seniors. Community leaders praised her transparency and strength. Newspapers wrote features highlighting how she transformed tragedy into opportunity for others. Her name became associated with integrity and compassion, qualities overshadowed during her daughter's illness. Meanwhile, his legacy decayed. He became a footnote in conversations, mentioned only as a cautionary example. Respect wasn't bought with wealth, it was earned through character. And now, the community acknowledged who truly carried the family's values. With power restored, some expected her to gloat or seek revenge. Others assumed she'd forgive and attempt reconciliation for the sake of appearances. She did neither. She chose independence. She purchased a modest home near friends, cultivated new routines, and rebuilt her life without dependence on anyone. She didn't erase the past, but she didn't let it dictate her future. She declined messages from opportunistic relatives and ignored his attempts to exploit sympathy. Freedom wasn't about punishing him, it was about never needing him again. She stood alone, and that was strength, not loneliness. In her final reflection, she recognized the journey wasn't just about inheritance, it was about dignity. She didn't triumph because she gained wealth. She triumphed because she refused to be defined by cruelty. Her daughter's final act wasn't to create conflict, it was to create security and honor. Through scholarships, community work, and personal independence, she ensured that her daughter's values outlived tragedy. She carried forward legacy, not bitterness. Her story didn't end with a courtroom victory. It ended with self-respect, stability, and purpose. She didn't become powerful enough to hurt others. She became powerful so she could never be hurt like that again.